My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I never imagined I would find myself in such a situation. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I would be sitting in my own kitchen, listening to my daughter-in-law call me a burden while she lived under my roof, I would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never saw coming. It all began when my beloved husband Harold passed away 3 years ago. We had been married for 48 wonderful years, and his sudden departure left me not just heartbroken, but completely lost. Harold had always handled our finances, our properties, and most of the important decisions. I was what you might call a traditional wife of my generation. I cooked, cleaned, raised our children, and trusted my husband to take care of everything else. After Harold's funeral, my son Thomas and his wife Patricia insisted I shouldn't live alone in our large family home. "Mother," Thomas had said, his voice filled with what I thought was genuine concern, "this house is too big for you now. Why don't you come stay with us for a while, just until you figure out what you want to do?" At the time, their offer seemed like a blessing. I was drowning in grief and overwhelmed by the thought of managing everything on my own. Patricia had even seemed supportive, helping me pack my belongings and making space for me in their spare bedroom. "We're family," she had said with a smile that I now realize never quite reached her eyes. "We take care of each other." So I moved in with them, bringing only my essential belongings and leaving my beautiful home, the house Harold and I had saved for decades to buy, where we had raised our children and created countless memories, sitting empty. The first few months weren't terrible. I helped with cooking and cleaning, tried to be useful without getting in the way. I even offered to contribute financially to the household expenses, but Thomas insisted it wasn't necessary. "You're our mother," he said. "Let us take care of you for once." But as time passed, I began to notice changes in their behavior, particularly Patricia's. The warmth she had shown initially began to fade, replaced by subtle looks of annoyance and barely concealed impatience. When I would join them for dinner, she would make comments about how much food I was eating. When I watched television in the living room, she would mention how she wished she could relax in her own home. When I took long baths, she complained about the water bill. Thomas, caught between his wife and his mother, began to withdraw. He spent longer hours at work, came home exhausted, and seemed to avoid being in the same room with both of us at the same time. I could see the strain in his eyes, but whenever I tried to talk to him about it, he would brush off my concerns. "Patricia's just stressed," he would say. "She's dealing with a lot right now." The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening in November. I had spent the day cleaning their house from top to bottom, preparing a roast dinner that I knew was Thomas's favorite, and even baking Patricia's preferred lemon cake for dessert. I thought I was being helpful, contributing to the household in the ways I knew best. When they came home from work, instead of appreciation, I was met with Patricia's cold stare. She surveyed the spotless kitchen, the perfectly set dining table, and the warm meal waiting for them, and her face twisted with something I had never seen before: pure contempt. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said to Thomas, speaking as if I wasn't standing right there. "She's taken over our entire kitchen, used our groceries, and now we're expected to be grateful for it. I can't do this anymore, Thomas. I can't live with this burden in our house." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. After everything I had given, everything I had contributed, after raising the man she married, and spending months trying to help their household run smoothly, I was nothing more than a burden to her. Thomas looked uncomfortable, but said nothing to defend me. His silence hurt almost as much as Patricia's words. "I want her gone," Patricia continued, her voice rising. "I want our life back. I want our privacy back. I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own home. Tired of sharing our space with someone who doesn't contribute anything meaningful. She needs to go to a nursing home or find somewhere else to live. But I'm done pretending this arrangement works. I stood there in shock, my hands trembling as I untied my apron. The woman I had welcomed into our family 20 years ago, the woman I had supported through her wedding planning, helped during her pregnancies, and treated like my own daughter, had just called me a burden and demanded my removal from what she considered her home. That night, I lay in the small spare bedroom that had become my world, staring at the ceiling and feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I thought about Harold, about how he would have handled this situation. I thought about the life we had built together, the sacrifices we had made, and the legacy we had left behind. For the first time since Harold's death, I realized I needed to take control of my own life. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted completely, my dear friend Evelyn, who had been my neighbor for over 30 years. Through tears, I told her everything that had happened. "Margaret," Evelyn said firmly, "you need to come home. Come back to your own house where you belong. And more importantly, you need to understand your own financial situation. Harold may have handled the paperwork, but those assets belong to you now." That afternoon, Evelyn picked me up and drove me to the office of Robert Morrison, the lawyer who had handled Harold's will and estate planning. I had met with him once after the funeral, but I had been so overwhelmed with grief that I hadn't fully absorbed everything he had told me about my inheritance. Mr. Morrison, a kindly man in his 60s, welcomed me with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "I'm so glad you've come to see me. I've been hoping you would reach out so we could discuss your financial position more thoroughly." What he told me over the next hour changed everything. Harold, it turned out, had been far more financially savvy than I had ever realized. Not only did I own our family home outright, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in town, but Harold had also invested wisely in real estate. Over the years, I owned 3 rental properties, all of which were generating steady monthly income. Additionally, there were substantial savings accounts, investment portfolios, and life insurance policies that I had been completely unaware of. "Mrs. Henderson," Mr. Morrison said gently, "you are what most people would consider quite wealthy. Your monthly income from rentals and investments alone is more than most people's salaries. You never need to depend on anyone financially." As the reality of my situation sank in, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief, empowerment, and yes, anger. I had been made to feel like a burden, like someone who needed charity, when in fact I was completely financially independent. But there was more. "There is one other property I need to discuss with you," Mr. Morrison continued, pulling out another file. "Harold purchased a house about 8 years ago as an investment property. The tenants moved out 2 years ago, just before Harold's illness became serious, and he never found new renters. The property has been sitting empty, but you've been receiving rental income from, let me check. Yes, from a Thomas and Patricia Henderson." My blood ran cold. "That's my son and daughter-in-law." Mr. Morrison looked puzzled. "According to our records, they've been paying rent on the property. For the past 5 years, Harold was their landlord, and now you are. The house they're living in belongs to you, Mrs. Henderson." The room seemed to spin around me. The house where I had been called a burden, where I had been made to feel unwelcome and unwanted, was actually my own property. Thomas and Patricia had been paying me rent to live in my house while treating me like an unwelcome guest in their home. "Are you absolutely certain?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Morrison showed me the deed, the rental agreement, and the bank records showing monthly payments from Thomas. There was no doubt. The house I had been asked to leave was mine. The drive back to what I now knew was my own property was silent. Evelyn kept glancing at me with concern, but I was lost in thought, processing not just the financial revelations, but the emotional implications of what I had learned. When I walked back into the house, Thomas was in the living room watching television while Patricia was in the kitchen. Neither of them acknowledged my return, which was typical of how they had been treating me lately. I sat down in the armchair across from Thomas and waited for him to look at me. "Thomas," I said, "quietly, we need to talk." He muted the television with obvious irritation. "What is it, Mother?" "I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Morrison today," I began. "He helped me understand my financial situation much better than I had before." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "That's good, Mother. I'm glad you're getting your affairs in order." "Yes, it is good," I agreed, particularly because I learned something very interesting about this house. The color began to drain from Thomas's face. "You see, I discovered that this house, the house where Patricia wants me to leave because I'm such a burden, actually belongs to me. You and Patricia have been paying rent to live in my property for 5 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia appeared in the doorway, having obviously overheard our conversation. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out the deed and rental agreement that Mr. Morrison had given me copies of. "Harold bought this house as an investment property. You've been his tenants, and now you're mine. Every month you've been paying rent to live in a house owned by the woman you just called a burden." Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. "Mother, I can explain." "Please do," I said calmly. "Explain to me how you could accept my help with cooking and cleaning and contributing to a household that I actually own, while allowing your wife to treat me like an unwanted charity case." Patricia's face had gone from pale to red with anger and embarrassment. "We didn't know you would find out," she said, which was perhaps the most honest thing she had said to me in months. "So you did know," I said. "You knew this was my house all along." Thomas finally looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and defensiveness. "Dad set up the rental arrangement. We've been paying fair market rent. It's not like we were living here for free." "No," I agreed. "You weren't living here for free. You were paying your landlord, me, while treating me like I was imposing on your generosity. Do you understand how that makes me feel?" The room fell silent again. Patricia had retreated back, into the kitchen, and I could hear her aggressively washing dishes. "What do you want us to do?" Thomas asked quietly. I had been thinking about this question during the entire drive home. "I want you to understand something, Thomas. I raised you to be honest, respectful, and kind. The man I raised would never have allowed his wife to speak to his mother the way Patricia spoke to me yesterday. The man I raised would have been honest about the living arrangement from the beginning." Thomas hung his head. "You're right, Mother. I'm sorry." "I'm not finished," I continued. "Patricia called me a burden and demanded that I leave my own house. She made me feel unwelcome in a home that I own. That behavior is unacceptable, and it needs to change." "What are you saying?" Thomas asked. "I'm saying that as the owner of this property, I have some decisions to make. I could evict you both and move back into my own house. I could raise your rent to cover the cost of the disrespect I've endured. Or we could discuss a different arrangement entirely." Patricia reappeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "Please don't kick us out," she said. "We can't afford to move right now. Thomas just got passed over for a promotion, and I haven't been able to find full-time work." This was news to me. "You're having financial difficulties?" Thomas nodded reluctantly. "We've been struggling for a while. The rent on this place is actually below market rate, and even so, we've been barely managing. If we had to find somewhere else..." Suddenly, many things began to make sense. Patricia's stress, her resentment toward me, her comments about expenses, they weren't just about not wanting me around. They were about financial pressure that I hadn't been aware of. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" I asked. "Because you're supposed to be the one who needs help," Patricia said bitterly. "How could we ask for help from someone we were supposed to be taking care of?" The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Here I was, a wealthy woman who had been made to feel like a burden by two people who were actually struggling financially while living in my house. I made a decision that surprised even myself. "I'm going to make you both an offer," I said. "But first, Patricia, you need to apologize for calling me a burden and for the way you've treated me in my own home." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Thomas gave her a warning look. She took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry. Margaret, I was wrong to speak to you that way. I was frustrated and stressed, but that's no excuse for being cruel." It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I had ever received, but it was a start. "Here's my offer," I continued. "I'm going to move back into my family home where I belong. You two can continue living here, but the rent is going to change." They both tensed, obviously expecting me to raise it substantially. "I'm going to lower your rent to half of what you're currently paying," I said. They stared at me in shock. "However," I continued, "there are conditions. First, you will both treat me with respect whenever we interact. Second, you will be honest with me about your situation instead of pretending and building up resentment. Third, Patricia, you will apologize to me properly and mean it." Patricia began to cry. "Margaret, I am truly sorry. I was jealous and angry and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve any of that." "Why were you jealous?" I asked. "Because everything seems so easy for you," she said through her tears. "You never had to work outside the home. You had Harold to take care of everything, and even after he died, you seemed to land on your feet. Meanwhile, I'm working 2 part-time jobs, we're behind on bills, and I felt like we were failing while you were just there, reminding me of what I couldn't provide for my own family." For the first time, I began to understand Patricia's perspective. She hadn't seen my struggle with grief, my confusion about finances, or my feelings of being lost and displaced. She had only seen what appeared to be security and ease. "Patricia," I said gently, "I haven't landed on my feet. I've been drowning since Harold died. I moved in here because I was scared and lonely and didn't know how to take care of myself. The only difference is that Harold left me financially secure, which I didn't even fully understand until today." The conversation that followed was the most honest one the 3 of us had ever had. Thomas admitted that he had been ashamed of their financial struggles and had hoped to keep them hidden from me. Patricia confessed that she had resented having to share their space when they were already feeling cramped and stressed. I shared my own feelings of displacement and grief. By the end of the evening, we had reached an understanding that should have happened months earlier. True to my word, I moved back into my family home the following weekend. Walking through the rooms that Harold and I had shared for so many years, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced since his death. This was where I belonged, surrounded by our memories and our belongings. But more than just changing my living situation, I had changed my understanding of myself. I was no longer the helpless widow who needed to be taken care of. I was a capable, financially independent woman who could make her own decisions and live her own life. The reduced rent I offered Thomas and Patricia gave them the breathing room they needed to get back on their feet. Thomas was able to take some time to search for a better job, instead of desperately clinging to his current position. Patricia was able to quit one of her part-time jobs and focus on finding something more suitable and better paying. More importantly, our relationship began to heal. Without the stress of forced cohabitation and hidden financial worries, we were able to interact as family members who cared about each other rather than as reluctant housemates. Patricia began visiting me regularly, and to my surprise, we developed a friendship that had never existed before. She helped me learn to manage my finances and property investments, while I shared my cooking and household management skills with her. We discovered that we had more in common than either of us had realized. Thomas and I also rebuilt our relationship. He began stopping by every weekend to help with yard work and home maintenance, and we started having regular Sunday dinners together, sometimes at his house, sometimes at mine. 6 months after I moved back home, Patricia knocked on my door, with tears in her eyes. "Margaret," she said, "I have something to tell you. Thomas got the promotion he was hoping for, and I found a full-time position with benefits. We're going to be okay financially."